Jesus called his 12 disciples to him and gave them authority to drive out evil spirits and to heal every disease and sickness.
The Bible contains remarkable stories of miracles and divine interventions. Moses parted the sea. Peter healed a man lame from his mother's womb. Jesus drove demons out of people and raised others from the dead. But are these types of events still happening today?
We too have a beam of divine light and guidance that God has put within the heart of every man. And it's one of the greatest proofs that there is a God.
More amazing supernatural things are happening than we realize.
This is Divine Intervention, the interview show that features intriguing people who've experienced the hand of God in amazing ways. Divine Intervention was created and produced with the purpose of encouraging believers, spiritual seekers, and skeptics alike that Jesus is alive and is still performing miracles and working in the world today.
I believe in miracles.
Here's your host, Daniel Fazina.
Hello, friend, and welcome to another exciting episode of Divine Intervention Radio. I am your host, Daniel Fazina, and very honored, privileged, and excited to be with you today because we've got a couple of wonderful guests who I know are going to encourage you. We're going to be talking about marriage and, the miracle of restored relationships. Sometimes we might not think of that as a miracle, but when God can change someone's heart, I think that is a miracle, and especially two people who are going in opposite directions. And, God intervened and saved and restored a marriage. Before we get to our special guest, though, I want to remind you that you can find us on Facebook, facebook.com/Divine Intervention Radio. You can also find us online. DivineInterventionRadio.com is the website there. You can check out all the archives of the show. You can follow me, Daniel Fazina, on Twitter at DanielFazina1 on Twitter.com. That's Daniel Fazina, the numeral 1. Okay, so I've got a couple of good friends who are very inspirational guests here. They've been through a lot with their marriage, and I hope this episode is going to encourage you. I think it will if you're going through a struggle in your relationship or your marriage, because even if you are divorced, even if your marriage has completely fallen apart, God can turn that around and bring you back together. And I think He is the God of restoration and reconciliation, and we're going to see an example of that today with my dear friends Tim and Sharon Allen. So let me give you a little bit of background about Tim and Sharon before we actually get to them. Tim and Sharon Allen live in Richmond, Virginia with their daughter Kristen. They met at a college in Florida in 1996, began dating in 1997, and were married in 1999. Kristen was born in 2002. After a few years of marriage, life began to throw them one curveball after another, and the enemy saw his opportunity to do some damage in their lives. This is the story of how God helped them to overcome the damage done and restore everything the enemy has stolen from them. And now it's my pleasure to welcome Tim and Sharon Allen right now on Divine Intervention Radio. Tim and Sharon, you are on Divine Intervention Radio. Thanks so much for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, we're talking about marriage in this episode, the miracle of a restored relationship, a restored marriage. And, we want to talk about your marriage specifically, of course. But before we get into that, why don't you tell us a little bit about your backgrounds, how you grow up, and, where you're from, and maybe how you came to know Jesus in the first place.
Okay, I was born and raised in a small town in New York. Not necessarily low economy, but kind of middle class, non-Christian. We didn't really attend church. My parents would send me to Sunday school on occasion with my older brother and younger sister. So we weren't what you would call a Christian family. We didn't really say prayers or anything like that. But it was what we knew, and it was family. Mm-hmm. So I lived there until I was 30. My parents got divorced when I was 12. Both
sorry to hear that.
Got remarried a couple years later. And it was, there was love in the home as much as there could be in a divorced family. And then when you bring in other siblings who you don't know and they're already grown up, it's kind of a culture shock to go from having 2 brothers and a sister to having 3 brothers and a half-brother and 4 stepsisters and a sister. And
oh my gosh.
It gets pretty crowded in the home quickly. I got saved in 1986 when I was 20 years old.
Okay.
I was engaged to be married, and the girl that I was seeing decided that she didn't want to get married. And I was kind of devastated, and I was working at McDonald's with a friend of mine, and he invited me to come to this youth group function. And I said, normally I'd be at my girlfriend's on the weekends, but I'm free now, so sure, I'll go. Well, then he showed up at my house and asked me where my suitcase was. And I said, suitcase? He said, oh, didn't I tell you it's an all-nighter? So I went up real quick and packed myself a little bag and went to the house where the all-nighter was. And I was a little intimidated. It was 30, 40 people that I had never met before.
Oh, wow.
But within a half an hour, every single one of them had come up and introduced themselves to me. Said they were glad to see me. So I started to feel at home and had quite a few good conversations with not only the youth group counselors, but many kids that were in the youth group. And they were unlike any teenagers I'd ever talked to. There was no cussing, no talking about, going out drinking and, having parties and all that stuff. So it was refreshing, and stayed up all night because I thought that's what all-nighters were for. And,
it wasn't a stay-awake-a-thon, was it?
No. So got up, we actually saw the sunrise. There was quite a few of us out on the back patio when the sun rose, and just had a really good time. And the following week I went to church, and I had gone to a Methodist church a couple of times with my dad and stepmom, and it was all I could do to stay awake in this church. So I was kind of leery of churches at that point, but he invited me to the church, and I went the following Sunday, and it was a different experience for me because there were people dancing in the Spirit, and there were people speaking in tongues and just rejoicing in the Lord, and I'd never seen that before. So it was quite intimidating, but I was sitting there, and I could feel God say to me, this is your home. And it was probably 2 months after that I got saved and baptized, and for the next 10 years, that was my home until I moved to Florida to go to college.
Oh, that's where you met this beautiful young lady, isn't it?
Yes,
Thank
it
you.
is.
You're welcome. So, Sharon, why don't you tell us a little about yourself and your background and how you got to Florida? Because, you were born in Florida, weren't you?
Yeah, I was born in Vero Beach, Florida.
Okay.
And raised in Central Florida until I was around 24 years old. And I met Tim in college at Warner Southern College, now known as Warner University.
Okay.
Started college, and I knew I wanted to do something. I was leaning more towards marine biology, but that didn't work out. I had a friend come to me and say that where he was praying, and he thought that the Lord wanted him to share with me that I should try teaching. So I applied for the program and qualified immediately. It was within the week, and I knew an answer, and it was yes. So.
And you hadn't considered teaching before that?
No.
Okay. Wow.
No.
And what kind of family were you raised in?
My mom has been married 3 times, so there have been multiple divorces in the family, multiple marriages. The first marriage, of course, was to my father, so I'm the oldest child of hers. And then her and my biological father were divorced when I was, 3 years old. And he ended up marrying someone from the church, same church that he and my mother were members of.
That had to be a little awkward.
Yeah, it still is.
Oh my gosh.
I have a half brother and a half sister from that marriage. Not very close with my biological father and siblings. It's been a very emotional, traumatic separation from my father. I don't really have a relationship with him anymore. And just the thought of trying to have one is very painful. That's a whole nother topic.
Okay.
But one thing that I've mentioned in a couple of other interviews that I've been on is the fact that because my father wasn't there, there's a father void in my heart. And even though my stepfather raised me, he was more of a provider. He wasn't really a nurturer per se. We went to private Christian school. They raised us in what they thought they raised us in church. And that was interesting. We learned a lot. That's where I feel like my biblical foundation from was that. And then my grandmother, which is my father's mother, they lived in Vero Beach. So my mom would take me to visit them every weekend, and she would play the piano and we would sing. And my grandma was probably my spiritual guide as far as believing in Jesus and having a personal relationship with him, because I saw her reading the word on a regular basis when I did go to see her. And she would pray, and she was so forgiving. It didn't matter who offended her. She was so forgiving. And so
that's a great example.
I saw that. Yeah, I miss her so much. She's in heaven. Can't wait to see her.
Amen.
But I did have a good relationship with her. And I'd say when I was probably 8 years old, a lady from our church named Brenda Congdon came to our home to visit. I guess they did regular church visits at the church we were members of. And she came out to our house and led my mom to the Lord, led me to the Lord, and I believe my 2 older sisters were led to the Lord. My younger sister was too young to know the difference, so it was kind of too soon for her. So my mom was in church for a little while. They tried to raise us in church, but my 2 older stepsisters, definitely the older one, fell away from the Lord at some point. I just don't remember when. I know that she kind of went on her separate way. My other sister is still in Florida. I miss her tremendously, but we don't really talk. And then my younger sister is in Northern Virginia. We don't really talk as much as we should. And I think that kind of stems from the poor relationships my mother had with her family. That's a whole nother topic.
Okay.
So multiple divorces, strained relationships. I've seen in action a lot of unforgiveness, a lot of people who weren't really practicing spiritually, and the ones who did, I leaned on heavily. So I was raised, of course, in Florida, and met Tim in college. And
I wanted to ask you, how did your perception, your relationship or lack of relationship with your father, how did that influence what you thought of God the Father, if at all? I mean, how did that affect your perception of God, let's say?
I felt like I was an ant with a magnifying glass, and if I didn't toe the mark just so, he would singe me a little bit. I was kind of scared of God. I didn't really have a good idea of who he was. I just felt like it was a legalistic type of thing based on just different ways that I had seen people, quote, serve the Lord, but never really had a personal relationship with him other than what I know my grandmother did.
Right.
So other than that, I really didn't know how to have a personal relationship with Jesus.
And how did that change?
It didn't change until after Tim and I had already been separated, and I was living on my own as a single mom.
Okay, well, we'll get to that. But I want to talk about how you guys met, first of all. You guys met in college, and then what happened from there?
We actually met the very first day that we were at the college. Classes hadn't started yet, but we were both in the same room waiting to take our entrance exams. And we were actually sitting across the table from each other, and there was a couple other people there, and somehow we got into the topic of birthdays, and she happened to mention to one of the other people there that hers was December 21st, and my ears immediately perked up because that's my birthday as well.
Wow. Same year?
No, not saying that. I wish. We're 12 years apart.
Okay.
But it kind of blew my mind that someone sitting right across the table from me had the same birthday. So she didn't believe me when I told her, so I pulled out my license and showed it to her, and we became friends. I was immediately attracted to her, mainly because of her red hair and she had a fiery spirit that kind of goes along with red hair, but
that's awesome.
We were friends for the first few months, and then we started talking at the Christmas dance that they had at the college, and nothing developed even after that for a while. And then one night I was at a friend's dorm room. We were studying for a Greek test, and one of the other guys in the hallway came up and said, Tim, Sharon tried to call you. She wants you to get a hold of her. So I went out and called her, and she had gone on a date with another gentleman. And I use that term loosely. But it didn't go very well. So she was upset. And I talked to her and tried to calm her down and just let her know that I was there for her. And then it was shortly after that she got really sick, like to the point where she couldn't go to classes. And she felt too weak to even go home. So I actually went and bought her some chicken soup and brought her some flowers and wrote her a note. And I think it was then that God spoke to her and said, this is the one I have for you.
So Sharon, did he have you at chicken soup?
He did, but I didn't want to admit it at that point.
That's awesome. I love it. Friends, you're listening to Divine Intervention Radio. I'm your host, Daniel Fazina, and we are visiting with our special guests, Tim and Sharon Allen, and they're sharing about their relationship. And, we're talking about, this episode is dedicated to the miracle of restored relationships, in particular, a restored marriage. And we just want you to know that if you're going through stuff, even if you've been divorced, there's always hope. God is a God of restoration. He can redeem us, restore our broken relationships, and even reconcile people who have been divorced. And we're speaking to two of those people right here, right now. So when did you guys get married?
We were engaged February 19th of 1999.
Okay.
I proposed to her at the homecoming basketball game in
Nice.
front of about 4,000 people.
No pressure there, right, Sharon?
None. Mm-mm.
Well, she thought she had won homecoming queen, so it kind of relieved some of the pressure.
Okay.
So
I even asked him, did we win?
with the ring on her finger. But we got married 5 months later,
Okay.
July 17th of 1999.
Okay. And what was your marriage like early on?
Early on, it was awesome.
Romantic. It was.
Yeah. We were definitely
Wonderful.
in the honeymoon stage.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
And
And how long does the honeymoon stage last?
Not very long.
Well, it's different for different people, but I
Right.
talked to Dr. Gary Chapman of the 5 Love Languages, and his research has indicated that the in-love feeling, that euphoric honeymoon stage feeling, generally doesn't last more than 2 years when you're dating or married.
Sounds about right.
So,
Yeah,
and then you kind of have to learn to love and make love an action and grow in different kinds of love. So,
Yes.
what was your experience?
I would say our honeymoon phase kind of lasted between a year and 2 years.
Okay.
And we still were very much in love, but, it's kind of the, I don't want to say monotony because that's a negative word, but the
Life.
familiarity of it and the realities and responsibilities of life start to seep in and take over
So
some
it's
of
not
that.
an overnight thing.
No.
Okay.
No,
It creeps in.
It's a process.
Okay. So what were some of the indicators or some of the things that were going wrong or kind of steering you in the wrong direction?
The biggest thing was finances.
Okay. That's a big one for a lot of people.
Yes, it is. And partially in-laws.
Boundary issues?
Big time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Big boundary issues.
But that was, I would say that really started, the major problems really started to hit, I would say probably 3 or 4 years into our marriage. So we had the euphoric honeymoon stage, and then a year or two of kind of complacency, and then the struggles. And maybe it's just that we always had them even during the complacency stage, but they started to multiply and become more and more evident. Especially we had a daughter who was born in our 3rd year of marriage. So, there were more responsibilities and more bills and the same amount of money. So finances became more and more of a prevailing problem.
Well, when she was born, we had to keep her in the hospital for another week. So that kind of hit the finances. And at the same time, while we were having the baby, we bought a boat. So that kind of wasn't really a smart decision at the time because we should have been totally focused on bringing that baby into the world and making sure we had everything we needed for the baby instead of buying the boat. And
I understand the boat was a real point of contention for you. It became a symbol of something bigger.
yeah, it did.
It did, and at the same time, it was kind of an inanimate scapegoat. I had the boat for almost 2 years, but the biggest blow to us was in the summer of 2004, 2 years after my daughter was born, and she lost her teaching position with the county that we were in because of certification issues. So we lost about $9,000 a year just with that.
Okay.
Well, then 3 weeks later, the principal at the school that I was teaching at, who was also the pastor of the church because it was like a Christian school, he came to our house the week before school started and said that enrollment was down and they needed to make some cuts. Well, I was one of those cuts. So that was another $4,000 a year lost. So we lost between $13,000 and $14,000 a year in the blink of an eye, and it just blindsided us.
Yeah.
So you were both out of work at the same time? Or
Yes.
you part-time working?
She was transitioning
Okay.
from the public school to the Christian school that I was actually teaching at. So we were looking forward to teaching together in the same school. Well, that didn't happen because he came to our house and they were getting rid of me before I could actually work with her.
So technically, we were both out of work at the same time, but I was
with a new baby
kind of hopeful.
and a new boat.
Yeah, a new baby, a new boat.
Wow.
A medical bill from the baby being in the hospital and me being in the hospital a couple extra days with her, and that was...
Yeah, I remember when my daughter was born, I think we were in the hospital for 2 or 3 days extra, and it was a good $5,000 or so.
Mm-hmm.
So I can imagine if it's,
Yeah.
It piles up fast.
Yeah, she was in the NICU, so
that's even more
very
expensive.
expensive. Yes. That took us a while to dig out of.
Wow. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of people I talk to who are specialists in marriage and in finances always say that one of the big stress factors in a marriage is finances, right up there at the top of the list of things that could possibly be affecting your marriage. So, very important to be good stewards and make good decisions. And I know my wife and I, we didn't have that in our early marriage either. And it took us going to Dave Ramsey's financial peace class to really get a handle on that aspect, because we neither of us really learned that from our schooling. I mean, I remember in high school we had one semester of home economics, and we did like maybe 1 or 2 days on budgeting, and that was it for my entire educational career. Nothing in college, So you kind of had to learn as you go, and it's an expensive way to learn.
Yeah, it is very.
So now you were, I guess, several years in, and then something pretty major happened with you, Tim. You came home one day and you found something a little different. What happened?
Well, I was working for FedEx at the time, and things were kind of rocky, but when I came home, there was an empty house. And, I looked all around, went through all the rooms, looked out in the park, and the car was gone, so I thought, well, maybe they went to the store.
You mean just empty of people or stuff, too?
Well, some stuff, but I didn't notice that until afterwards. I first off noticed that they were gone.
Okay.
And then I walked through the house, and I walked into the little area between the kitchen and the living room, and there was a note, and it said that I'm leaving you.
Wow.
So I was pretty devastated. Didn't know what to do, didn't know what to think, didn't know what to feel.
Had you expected that, or was this totally out of left field?
It was totally like a blindside hit.
Wow.
That I did not see coming.
Isn't that amazing? Most people I talk to who had similar situations, they feel the same way. Unexpected. Blindside. Like, I knew we had some issues, but I didn't know it was that bad.
Exactly.
And I think that comes down to communication. Learning how to communicate to each other, what we're going through, what we're feeling. And Sharon, I want to get your thoughts on that when we come back. We're on the other side of the break and see what happened to bring you to this point, and then how God worked in your life after that.
We'll be right back with more from Daniel Fazina and Divine Intervention right after this.
I believe in miracles.
Times are tough, not getting easier, but there's an opportunity that could make a significant change in your financial situation. People are paying too much for home utilities, and everybody has them. Help friends and family save money and get paid for it. No obligation. You don't even have to talk to anyone unless you want to. Just listen to a 3-minute recorded message. Call now, 715-GET-CASH. That's 715-GET-CASH. Listen, decide, and you could be on your way to a better tomorrow. 715-438-2274. That's 715-GET-CASH.
Well, everybody's got a story to tell, and everybody's got a wound to be healed. I wanna believe there's beauty here, 'cause oh, I get so tired of holding on. I can't let go, I can't move on. I wanna believe there's meaning here. How many times have you heard me cry out, God, please take this? How many times have you given me strength to just keep breathing? Oh, I need you, God, I need you now.
Welcome back to Divine Intervention Radio. I'm your host, Daniel Fazina. DivineInterventionRadio.com is where you can find us. Facebook.com/Divine Intervention Radio. If you're just tuning in, we've been speaking with our special guests, Tim and Sharon Allen. And before the break, we were talking about how Tim came home one day and found that his wife and daughter were gone. And he found a note from Sharon saying, "I'm leaving you." Sharon, I want to talk to you about your mindset and what kind of led you to take that drastic action in your marriage.
I think when we decided to move to Virginia, I had already had it in my mind that I was going to leave, and it was basically because I had blamed him for everything that had gone wrong. I still had that big void in my heart, the dad void that we talked about earlier, and I was just fed up. I was so sick and tired of dealing with the financial mess. I didn't feel like Tim listened to me. We weren't really going to church. We weren't praying together. We really weren't, to me, we weren't a couple. And I felt like Tim was going to do whatever he was going to do, and I needed to do whatever I needed to do, and that was take care of Kristen. My mom offered to allow me to move in with her and Kristen, but she said Tim can't come. And, I mean, I could see where she wanted to help. In her mind, she was helping, and at that point, she probably felt the need to do that for her daughter. So I understand her point of view. But looking back on it, we talked about people overstepping boundaries, and looking back on it, that was one big thing that shouldn't have happened. And
You feel like, did your mom plant the seed in you to like leave and go to her, or did she just kind of offer to help when you told her I'm leaving him, or how did that work out?
I think in her mind she was offering to help, but she saw her daughter suffering and struggling, and saw her daughter upset, and I think she did what any parent would do who saw their daughter and the emotional mess I was in, and she just wanted to rescue me. And I think in her mind that's what that's why she offered to do that. And but I think she also influenced me to leave Tim as well, just because of all the mess she saw me going through emotionally and spiritually. And so yes.
Okay. And so you guys were separated in 2005 and officially divorced in 2007. What happened in the interim, though, between those 2 years? I mean, you had to go through, I guess, a custody battle and
Custody battles, visitation.
Court, a couple times.
A lot of court appearances, depositions, which I did not attend. I was dead set against a divorce, and I didn't support it, so I didn't feel I needed to be at the deposition.
So what happens in absentia, I guess, when you're not there at the deposition?
Well, ironically enough, Sharon went to the deposition with her mom, and both her and her mom were interviewed by the lawyer and answered the questions. But then at the end of the deposition, they were given the option to sign or have someone sign for them. And both Sharon and her mom opted to have someone sign for them. I was not there, so obviously I didn't sign, so our divorce became final without either one of us signing anything saying we're divorced.
Isn't that interesting?
That's what I thought.
Wow. So you're dead set against it, and you're pushing for it, Sharon, but how did you, Tim, how did you try to prevent it, I guess, in this process?
I don't think I tried to prevent it, but I wasn't going to aid it either.
Okay.
I wasn't going to do anything other than, I figured once I got done with the custody part of it, that was all I was going to give in to.
Okay. Did you have any hope of reconciliation at that point?
I would say not even 1%. I was very pessimistic, and a lot of that came from conversations that she had had with family members of mine who were trying to figure out what's going on. Mm-hmm. You know, they're in another state, so they don't know, they're not there, they're not seeing what's happening. So they had a lot of questions, and they talked both to myself and to Sharon. And, you know, they basically told me after they would talk with her, yeah, she wants a divorce. She doesn't want to be married to you anymore. So I started to go into a depression, and I had family and friends who would try to encourage me to just get away, you know, walk away from it all. If she doesn't want to be with you, just walk away. And the number one thing that kept me in the area and kept me around was my daughter. Mm-hmm. You know, I love my daughter more than life itself, and I would never ever even think about moving more than an hour away,
right?
Let alone 5 states away.
Yeah, I can't even imagine how painful that would be to be separated from your daughter. I mean, me having a daughter myself now, I understand it a lot more. So that's a blessing to have her.
Yes, very much so.
What was your mindset, Sharon, going through this period of time, and how did it change? Because it did obviously change.
Right after I moved in with my mom, I started attending a Baptist church. They had a program for single moms, and they also had a Bible study group called Discovery Class, and they met at 9:30 on Sunday morning, and then after Discovery Class, we would go to the sanctuary and attend like a late sanctuary service. Mm-hmm. And I connected with a lot of people, made a lot of friends, had decided, okay, I'm moving on, put Kirsten in Sunday school. I really was ready to move on and get on with my life, and got some financial counseling personally, basically was seeking God, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I went back to college, University of Phoenix, online. So I was teaching and going to school and being a single mom and living in a 1-bedroom apartment all at the same time, and attending church and just trying to find some type of emotional stability, I guess, and spiritual stability after everything.
Was your daughter Kristen living with you?
Yes.
Or you had joint custody or visitation? Or
well, we did have visitation rights. Tim had her every other weekend or something.
I don't even remember.
Okay. I think it was every other weekend, and in the beginning it was supervised visitations.
Okay.
And I figured out through putting Kristen in counseling that we didn't need to continue doing that. So we started doing unsupervised visitations. The judge told Tim he needed to secure residence of his own and basically start building a life of his own. And so he did everything the judge told him. He started going back to church. He started attending West End Assembly of God and Richmond, Virginia. Awesome church, by the way, because that's where we are now.
That's where I met you guys.
You did meet us there. So just getting some solace and stability, and I was going to the gym. I lost a ton of weight. I was looking really good. Awesome. And I got hurt in the gym. And I got hurt so bad that I thought I was having a heart attack.
Oh, my gosh.
And I remember my parents, I called my mom. She rushed me to the emergency room. They did some CT scans. They couldn't figure out what was wrong. So the ER doctor told me to go see a specialist. And I found out through the specialist that I developed something called costochondritis. I guess a lot of football players get it. When they get hit in the chest, your sternum and your rib cage can separate. There's cartilage in there that can come apart. And it was very difficult to go to work. It was very difficult to breathe. I just remember laying in bed crying out to God, please, God, take this pain away. And one night
doing like bench pressing or something?
I was doing butterfly press, butterflies. I don't know what the machine is called. I just call it the butterfly machine. It's like a backwards press, and you bring it forward. And I think I was just doing too much one night, was stressed out, who knows, and bench pressed too much and pulled it out. I mean, I heard a pop. I distinctly remember hearing a pop that night, but never felt any pain for weeks.
Wow.
Until it was too late. And I ended up calling him one night and just had this conversation on the phone with him saying, I'm in so much pain. I feel like I'm dying. And he couldn't get there fast enough. He was, a 20-minute trip took, 10 minutes? He was there for me. And just different things like that started happening. And one thing led to another. He kept coming over and visiting. And I started allowing him to visit Kristen. And I think we started attending church, actually, before we even moved back in together for how long? A year?
Possibly a year.
Yeah, and then finally we just decided we're going to give it a shot. So we moved in together, and we lived together for about 9 years, and continued to go to church. I decided to switch from Grove Avenue to WEAG. Nothing wrong with Grove Avenue, by the way. Grove Avenue is a wonderful church. But because Tim was there and I was trying to see if there was a possibility of us getting back together, I decided to go to WEAG. But I need to back up a little bit, because when I was living in the one-bedroom apartment, I was seeking God, and I was so overwhelmed trying to get my degree, trying to do all these things, trying to be a single mom, which I had never been before. It was so hard. And I remember one day I was so fed up and things were so hard that I laid in the floor of my living room. The sun was beaming in through like these glass sliding doors that I had in my apartment. And the sun just shone on my face. And I love the sun. I love being at the beach. I love the warmth. And I felt the Lord say that that's what I needed to do. And I just cried out to him. I said, God, if you need me to change me. If you want me to go back to Tim, I'll go back to Tim. I'll do whatever you want, Lord. I'm just so tired of being tired. I'm tired of hurting. I'm tired of being on my own. I can't do this alone. And that's when things started to really start coming to fruition for us. Once I gave up and laid everything on the table to God and said, I can't control anything anymore, Lord. It's out of control. Take over. And that's when he finally took over. And Tim and I started rebuilding our relationship.
Wow, that is amazing. It's quite an amazing place to be in surrender and brokenness, you know. When we come to the end of our rope, that's where God can really come in and do amazing things. And that happened for me. I mean, being sick unto death in a hospital bed, dying of cancer, coming to a place of utter surrender to God and saying, you know what, I can't heal myself. I can't control it. I can't figure it out. I said, Lord, you know I'm your child. If you want to take me, I will go with you. But if you want to heal me and let me live, I'll just do my best to continue to serve you and point people to you. And that was a real moment of release for me. And so I can definitely understand where you're coming from. And friend, if you're listening, and if you're at a place right now of brokenness, where you feel like you're at the end of your rope, that is not necessarily a bad place to be. That's where sometimes God allows us, or he maneuvers us into these positions where we can really reach out and find him, and that's where he can do a miracle in your life. And we talk a lot about miracles on the show. Obviously, we talk about healings, we talk about conversion experiences, we talk about all sorts of amazing miracles. But one of the greatest miracles, I think, in my opinion, is just a changed heart, And that's what the Lord does. He changes the world one heart at a time. And he's obviously done that with you guys. So, after that point, Sharon, when you just kind of gave it all to the Lord, what was the next step? How did you go from there? And Tim, were you aware of this, or how did this come to you?
I wasn't aware of the prayer that she had made with the Lord, but I was aware of the prayers that I had made.
Okay. What were those?
I went from wanting to blame her for everything, praying, Lord, change her. Change her heart towards me. Change her heart towards this whole situation. And I always felt like they were fruitless prayers. Like God wasn't listening, not because he isn't able to, but because they weren't being sent up in a proper attitude.
Okay.
And it was then that I felt like God wanted me to change my prayers to, God, change me. Change my heart. Tell me what to do. Show me what to do. And it was when those things started arising in her life that it would have been very easy for me to say, she is so needy. She's such a drama queen. Stop calling me. But God spoke to me and said, just be there for her. No matter what, just be there for her. And just a funny little story that goes along with that. I was talking to her on the phone about the coming weekend's visitation with Kristen. And
Kristen being your daughter?
My daughter, yes.
For the listeners.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
And she was at her mom's, and then her mom and stepdad were repainting their townhouse. So I think as a joke, her mom told Sharon, hey, ask Tim if he wants to come over and help us paint. And in my head, I can hear her in the background saying this, and in my head I'm thinking, that is the last thing in the world I want to do. I have absolutely no desire to help this woman who enabled my wife to leave me. Why would I want to go paint her house?
That's a good question.
But then I stopped, and I remembered that God said, no matter what, be there for her. And it necessarily wasn't being there for her, but it was being there for someone she loves.
Right.
So I started to pray, okay, Lord, if you want me to go and help them paint their house, because, they're not really mobile people. It would be very difficult for them to finish the painting. And so I said, if you want me to go, show me a sign. And I was actually driving my work van, coming back from the Hampton Roads area back to Richmond. And I got behind this pickup truck. It was a white pickup truck, and it had the ladders on the top. And there was writing and numbers on the back. And I just happened to look up directly after praying that prayer. And what does it say on the back of the truck but Timothy's painting? So I said,
isn't God amazing?
Okay, God, I asked for a sign. You gave it to me. So I went and helped them paint their townhouse. And I think that was a turning point in her mom's eyes, that I would be that willing to help them out despite of everything that had happened.
It was.
And
that's amazing.
And things just started to really, I don't want to say snowball because it's often seen as a negative term, but things really started to get rolling for us.
Right. Wow. That's amazing. I've heard other people tell stories too, and they ask God for a sign, and he's so funny. He picks the most amazing things and very personal things, very funny things a lot of times, but he gets the point across, obviously.
He sure did. He sure did.
So you literally just looked up from praying that prayer?
Yes.
And there it was. Wow.
I can tell you the exact spot it was. It was on Route 64 in the swampy area next to the military base there. There's a little swampy area, and I was right on that bridge.
Wow. So, wow. Well, friend, again, you're listening to Divine Intervention Radio. I'm your host, Daniel Fazina, and we're speaking with our special guest, Tim and Sharon Allen, and they're telling us about their marriage, how it fell apart, and how God helped them rebuild it. So, now at this point, Tim, when you got that sign, Had you already been divorced at this point? And
Yes, we were.
Or how long have you been divorced at this point?
I would say about a year or so.
A year or so, okay. But you're starting to get together. God's changing your hearts, working together. Obviously, you have your daughter, so you're visiting with your daughter, Kristen.
Yes.
And then, how did you guys rebuild this relationship?
Well, it was, I don't want to say tempting, but the thought was in our head to, hey, let's end this divorce thing. Let's get remarried and put an end to all this madness. Because that's exactly what divorce is madness. But I think God spoke to both of us individually and together and said, get some counseling.
Get godly counseling.
Learn how to deal with the past. So that in the future, when things come up, the past is not brought into the present fights. Leave the past in the past. Allow me to tear down the walls that you've built up through this divorce. And let's build up that trust with each other and just believe that I'm going to be with you every step of the way.
Wow.
So we started to go to a Christian counselor in Richmond. Tremendous blessing. Not always easy, not always pleasant.
No, not at all. It was hard.
A lot of times, it's like when a jeweler is taking gold to make a ring or a necklace, they have to put it in the fire first.
Right.
And when it comes out of the fire, it's not done yet. There's shaping that needs to be done. There's scraping of materials that aren't in the gold, that shouldn't be in the gold, that are scraped away. And that's the way it is with our lives. And when you're going through counseling with a good counselor who knows what he's doing, you're going to feel that scraping, and you're gonna
definitely dig up some old bones.
Dug up, and it's just.
It reminds me of a Christian song about the refiner's fire. That's the analogy that's used to describe how God purifies us. Sometimes through trials of our own doing, sometimes through spiritual attacks or whatever. But he, the word says that all things work together for the good of those who love the Lord, and to those who are called according to His purpose. That's one of the verses I held on to going through cancer, and it's obviously it's at play in your life as well. So you're going through that refiner's fire. You're taking your time to learn how to communicate, to learn how to reconcile, deal with the past, fight fair, I guess you could say.
Yes.
Yeah.
What about forgiveness? How was that for you guys?
That was a big one,
Yeah,
and even throughout the counseling, and shortly before the reconciliation process was complete, forgiveness and trust were a major thing.
Huge.
And also, even though you're dealing with a lot of things that happened in the past, you could forgive all you want, but the thought is still there.
The pain.
It's not something you forget. It's something you forgive.
Right.
So there was always the fear that, she'll go back into those patterns. I'll go back into those patterns that led up to the divorce.
So how do you make sure that you don't repeat those patterns?
You have to talk about it. And in our case, I went and got therapy on my own because I knew with the situation with my parents, there was obviously something going on in my mind and my heart that I needed to deal with. And I needed to get my head on straight so that I could learn to trust again. I did not trust him. And it was based on all the stuff from my childhood. I didn't trust people, and I still have a hard time with it. But we've learned to communicate better, and I've learned to say, well, when you said that, what did you mean? Or if we get into a heated argument, instead of fussing, yelling back, I'll say, well, sweetie, you said this, but this is how I took it, and did you mean it that way? Or what were you trying to say? And you have to ask questions to your spouse, because if you don't, it can turn into a major heated argument. You really have to get to the meat and potatoes of what's really going on here, because obviously Satan's trying to attack you. Right. But I think our biggest thing was dealing with it individually and then coming together and allowing God to work on us together. Because when you're going through something this traumatic and this painful, it's really a separate issue. Even though it's together, you're both going through something that's causing it, because it takes two to tango. My mom always says it takes two to tango. Mm-hmm. And it takes two to make a marriage, and it takes two to make a divorce. So you both have to figure it out separately and together.
How has your relationship with God changed throughout this process?
I think, speaking for both of us, we've learned how to lean on him more. We've learned how to seek his guidance more, to be spending more time individually in his word and in prayer. I mean, you can pray together and read the word together all you want, but it's all about the individual relationship with Jesus Christ that you need. You can't rely on the together stuff all the time. Mm-hmm.
And you can't be fake about your relationship with Christ. It's not an emotion you go through. Your relationship with Christ is a personal, very real, digging deep type of relationship. It's real. It's not something you just go through the motions. So I encourage people who I talk to that I know are going through divorces. I'm like, well, have you gone to therapy? Well, have you prayed? Have you gone to your pastor? Have you sought out help individually? Because that's really where Satan attacks you, is your heart, your spouse's heart. He attacks you separately so that you're fighting each other.
He wants to keep you separated.
He does.
But there is good news. The end of your story, you actually worked it out, and you are officially remarried now. Isn't that right?
Yes.
As of when?
July 9th of this past year, 2016.
July 9th of 2016. And so you were divorced for how long exactly?
About 9 years.
Technically, a little over 9 years.
Divorced for 9 years, people, and yet God brought them back together, and they are now back and officially married together, working on their relationship with the Lord, and building their family. That's a wonderful thing, and it's really an encouragement, I think, to a lot of people who may be going through something like that. You may be divorced. You may be alienated from your family, your spouse, your loved ones, but you know what? God is in the reconciliation business, and if he can speak to Sharon and Tim and change their hearts and bring them back together, he can do the same for you and your loved one. Guys, we just got about 30 seconds left, so if there's any parting words of advice you'd want to give to someone who may be struggling with separation or divorce, what would that be?
The number one piece of advice is to seek God in everything. Don't let Satan take away from you what God wants to bless you with. Satan wants to steal, rob, and destroy you of joy, happiness, and peace. And God has blessed you with your spouse, whether you feel like it or not. And it is your responsibility to do everything you can to bring God the glory through your marriage. So fight for it. At all costs, fight for it.
What do we say? Put down your weapons and what?
Yeah, put on your weapons and pick up your tools and build a stronger marriage.
Put down your weapons and pick up your tools. The tools that God gives you.
That's awesome. I love it. Well, Tim and Sharon Allen, I want to thank you so much for your openness, your vulnerability, your willingness to share with our listeners. And I pray that God continues to bless you and your marriage, and may he continue to bring glory to himself through it. You guys are awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Divine Intervention with your host, Daniel Fazina. You can email Daniel at divineintervention@mail.com. That's divineintervention@mail.com. All programs of Divine Intervention are available online at divineinterventionradio.com. That's divineinterventionradio.com. Join us next time here on Divine Intervention.